Jerusalem was silent that night. Rain slid down the stones of the citadel, darkening the walls that had seen too much blood to tell which side it belonged to. The fires outside had gone out, leaving only torchlight flickering through the corridors, bending with the wind like a candle before confession. In the deepest cell of the fortress, a man knelt. His armor was scarred, his face hidden behind shadow. He was a Templar, Sir Etienne de Vallon, guardian of prisoners too broken to resist. His sword lay beside him, unsheathed but clean. He did not pray for victory. He prayed for forgiveness. The words came slow, heavy with exhaustion. Domine, miserere nobis. Lord, have mercy upon us. His voice cracked on the last word. Behind the iron bars, another man stirred. The prisoner sat on the ground, his wrists bound, his robe torn and stained with blood. His name was Yusuf ibn Khalid, once a scholar of Damascus, now a captive of the Crusade. His lips moved silently, whispering the ancient verses that had steadied him through battle and loss. Bismillah-ir-Rahman-ir-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. The syllables trembled, but the tone was calm. The guard did not notice at first. The storm outside drowned all other sounds. But as the rain softened, the two voices began to rise, one in Latin, one in Arabic. Weaving through the still air, neither knowing the other prayed. The rhythm was the same. The pauses fell together. Between the bars, their prayers overlapped like echoes of the same heart. Etienne froze, his lips still moving, listening. He recognized nothing of the words, yet the cadence struck something deep, familiar, like the sound of a psalm heard through a wall. He looked up. The prisoner's eyes were closed, his hands lifted slightly, palms open, facing heaven. The torchlight flickered again, and on the wall, two shadows appeared. One of a knight, one of a man in chains. The shapes stretched, swayed, and for a moment merged into one. Etienne looked away. He felt shame without knowing why. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. The echo ran down the corridors like a drumbeat for ghosts. The knight reached for the water jug, filled a wooden cup, and walked to the bars. He slid it toward the prisoner without a word. Yusuf hesitated, then nodded. Their eyes met, brief, quiet, uncertain. It was the first exchange between them in days. As Yusuf drank, Etienne spoke, not sure why. "You prayed," he said. Yusuf lowered the cup. "So did you." Etienne frowned. "For what?" Yusuf answered softly. "For mercy. The same thing you asked for." The words hung between them, strange and heavy. Etienne wanted to deny it, to say his prayer was different, that his faith was truer. But the look in the prisoner's eyes silenced him. There was no argument in them, only fatigue. The kind born not of defeat, but of too much belief. Etienne stepped back. "Sleep," he said roughly, though he meant peace. The storm outside quieted. Rain slid down the window bars like tears over stone. The torch hissed, throwing one last shimmer of light before dying. In the dark, both men whispered again, one repeating Pater Noster, the other reciting Al-Fatiha. The same plea rose twice into the same silence. When the last word faded, Jerusalem breathed. The bells in the churches were still. The muezzins had not yet called. Only the wind moved through the city, carrying two prayers that no longer cared which name of God would answer first. And in that silence, heaven listened. In the summer of 1191, Jerusalem was the wound every king wanted to heal and every priest wanted to own. The Second Crusade had ended in dust and shame, but Europe's pride had not learned silence. When Saladin took the Holy City in 1187, the cry went out again across Christendom. From Paris to London to the monasteries of the Rhine, men sharpened blades and souls alike. They said they were marching for God, but each carried his own reason: penance, ambition, fear, hope, or simply the desire to belong to something holier than himself. The Third Crusade became a storm of banners. The Lionheart came from the west, fierce and bright, his armor shining like the sun that baked the bones of the fallen. From the east, Saladin rose, calm, patient, unyielding. The desert called him son. Between them stretched 1,000 miles of prayer and blood. Acre was the first altar of that war. Its walls held 2 years of siege and starvation. When it fell, the victors sang hymns that sounded like dirges. Thousands of prisoners were taken, men of the Crescent waiting for ransom that never came. When patience broke, mercy followed. On a hill outside Acre, the Crusaders killed nearly 3,000 captives in one afternoon. The ground ran red and silent. Richard rode through it without speaking. He claimed justice. Others called it rage. No one saw heaven move. Months later, Jerusalem still waited, unclaimed, untouched, trembling like a candle in wind. Richard marched south toward it, his soldiers hungry, sick, and weary of holiness. The Saracens held strong within their walls. A fragile truce formed, then broke, then reformed again. Faith bending under exhaustion. In the aftermath of Acre, small groups of prisoners were exchanged, guarded, traded, or forgotten. Some were marched to Jerusalem itself, where the lines between victor and captive blurred. There, amid the ruins and rebuilt mosques, a strange quiet ruled. The war had burned everything that could burn. Only faith remained, smoldering. Within the citadel of the Holy City, both sides kept their prisoners. Muslim and Christian guards watched one another across the same courtyards, their uniforms different, their prayers identical in desperation. One prisoner among them, Yusuf ibn Khalid, had been taken after Acre, spared only because he could read and write. The emir valued his tongue more than his sword. He was sent to Jerusalem, chained but alive. The Templars, broken after years of crusading, now served as keepers of order in what was left of the Christian quarter. They guarded walls they did not own and watched prisoners who no longer hated them. One of them was Sir Etienne de Vallon, knight, veteran, believer gone quiet. He had marched under Richard, had seen Acre burn, and since that day had lost his voice in prayer. When he was assigned to the citadel, he asked for the lowest duty, to guard the cells. It was not humility, but penance. The master of the order called it weakness. Etienne called it peace. That is how the story began. A scholar from Damascus locked behind iron, and a knight from France holding the key, both men exhausted by victory, both too faithful to renounce the God who no longer answered. Outside, the war continued. Inside, something else began, a stillness that no army could command. Sir Etienne de Vallon had forgotten what triumph felt like. His armor still bore the cross of his order, but the white cloth was stained gray by years of dust, blood, and rain. He had fought at Arsuf and watched friends die shouting God's name. He had knelt beside priests who blessed slaughter as if it were sacrament. He had seen too many banners raised over corpses to believe victory belonged to heaven. Now he prayed quietly, without hope, because silence was safer than faith. He came from the valley of the Loire, a second son with no inheritance but conviction. The church had given him purpose, the sword had given him pride, and war had taken both. He had joined the Templars seeking absolution through duty, but each campaign only deepened the wound he sought to heal. Jerusalem was meant to redeem him. Instead, it left him empty. Every evening, when the city's bells clashed with the muezzin's call, Etienne would pause at the window of the corridor overlooking the courtyards. He would listen as the two sounds collided, then faded into something strangely beautiful. He never told anyone, but those moments were the only times he felt close to God. Below, in the lower cells, Yusuf ibn Khalid spent his days in silence. Once he had taught Quranic verse in Damascus, writing poetry between lessons, his ink scented with musk and olive oil. When Saladin called for men of faith to defend Jerusalem, Yusuf took up the sword not out of hatred, but duty. He had killed once, a Frankish knight whose eyes had reminded him of his own students. Since that day, the verses would not come to him. Now, in his cell, he tried to write prayers in the dust, his fingers tracing letters that the wind erased. The guards feared him less than they pitied him. He asked for no food beyond what was given, no water beyond need. He sat beneath the small window where a thread of light fell, reciting softly in Arabic the verses he had memorized as a boy. His chains clinked with each syllable, turning his prayer into rhythm. Etienne began to notice the sound, faint, almost melodic, when he passed the corridor at dusk. At first it unsettled him. He thought the prisoner mocked him, speaking charms in a language of defiance. But one evening, he stopped to listen. The voice was low, the tone humble. It did not sound like rebellion. It sounded like confession. When he entered the cell, Yusuf looked up without fear. The torchlight caught the line of his jaw, the bruises fading on his cheek. "You speak to your God," Etienne said. Yusuf nodded. "And you?" "I used to." Silence stretched between them. The air smelled of rust and oil. "You stopped?" Yusuf asked. Etienne hesitated. "He stopped first." Yusuf smiled faintly. "Then perhaps he is listening." The knight frowned. "To what?" "To both of us," Yusuf said. "To see who breaks the silence first." That night, Etienne could not sleep. The man's calm unsettled him more than any blade. He remembered the day he took his vows, kneeling before the altar, swearing to guard the innocent and crush the infidel. He realized, too late, that he no longer knew which was which. In the following days, he found himself lingering longer near the cell. He brought Yusuf extra bread, claiming it was waste from the kitchen. He allowed him a cup of water at night. They spoke little, but each gesture was a sentence. One afternoon, Etienne passed the chapel and saw a group of knights praying before a relic, a splinter of the true cross. They recited the Pater Noster in unison, their voices echoing through the stone vaults. He joined them, but his voice faltered at "Thy will be done." Later, returning to the cell, he found Yusuf kneeling again, whispering his own words. "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." We belong to God, and to Him we return. Etienne did not understand the language, but he understood the surrender. 2 men, 1 chain, 2 prayers. Both spoke to the same silence, hoping it might echo back mercy. The rain returned to Jerusalem after many dry months, washing dust from the walls and cooling the stones that had stored too many footsteps. Inside the citadel, the air smelled of iron and damp earth. Etienne lit his torch and descended into the corridor where the prisoners lay. He did not know why he came. It was not his watch. Perhaps habit, perhaps penance. He told himself it was duty, but duty no longer had meaning when the soul was already condemned. When he reached Yusuf's cell, the man was awake. The small window cast a dim light, just enough to show his hands open in front of him, palms upward. His lips moved slowly, the words soft, rhythmic, deliberate. Etienne stopped at the door. He listened. At first he could not tell what he heard. It was not Latin, not Greek, not a language he knew, but there was something familiar in the tone, the cadence of humility, the pauses that invited silence to become sacred. It reminded him of monks chanting in the cloister at dawn, when the world still belonged to prayer. Yusuf's voice rose, barely a whisper. "Allahumma igfir li walahu." "O God, forgive me and forgive him." Etienne's grip on the torch loosened. The flame wavered. He did not know what the words meant, but something in the sound of them, the soft invocation, the tenderness, pierced the armor that faith had hardened around his heart. He took a step closer until his shadow fell across the bars. Yusuf did not stop praying. Etienne lowered his head, whispering his own words almost in defiance. Miserere me, Deus. Have mercy upon me, O God. For a moment, the two voices rose together, one in Latin, one in Arabic, different tongues, same plea. The air trembled between them as if the very stones strained to listen. The knight knelt. He did not know why. He did not understand this man, this faith, this prayer that seemed to reach beyond walls and empires. Yet he felt something break open inside him, a quiet he had not known since childhood. When the prayers ended, both men stayed still. Rain fell outside, tapping the roof like fingers counting beads. Etienne stood and said, "You prayed for me." Yusuf opened his eyes. "I prayed for us." "Why?" "Because we kill for the same God," Yusuf said, "and he must be weary." The words landed like confession. Etienne wanted to argue, to reclaim holiness for his side, but the truth was too sharp to hold. He stared at the prisoner through the iron bars and said, "You believe he listens to both?" Yusuf smiled faintly. "He has 2 ears." Etienne almost laughed, then stopped himself. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than blasphemy ever could. He turned away, whispering, "If that is true, then why this?" "Because we only speak," Yusuf answered. "We do not listen." The knight stood in silence for a long time. Finally, he set the torch on the ground and sat against the wall opposite the cell. They said nothing else. Outside, thunder echoed through the streets. The city shivered, its stones remembering every siege, every prayer, every broken truce. In the distance, a muezzin's call rose faintly from a minaret, answered by the bells of the sepulchre. The two sounds crossed in the air, became one, then faded into the storm. Yusuf closed his eyes and whispered again, softer this time. "Peace be upon the merciful," Etienne replied, barely audible, "and upon those who show it." 2 men, 2 faiths, 1 silence. The rain fell harder, as if heaven itself wished to wash the city clean. Days passed in stillness. The war beyond the walls grew faint, reduced to rumor and wind. Inside the citadel, the world had shrunk to stone corridors, dripping water, and the slow rhythm of breathing. Etienne brought Yusuf bread each morning, not as guard to prisoner, but as one human to another. The ritual required no words. Sometimes they nodded, sometimes not at all. Yet in the quiet exchange, something sacred began to take root. Jerusalem was uneasy that spring. Merchants whispered of truces that might hold or might break. The faithful from both sides crept back into the streets, rebuilding shrines from rubble. The dome of the rock and the church of the Holy Sepulchre faced one another like mirrors, reflecting the same sky. Between them stretched the city's single shared relic, silence. Etienne had started to hear that silence differently. It no longer mocked him. It waited. It asked him to listen. He spent his evenings in the empty chapel, his helmet left beside the altar, his hands open. He prayed without words, trusting that perhaps prayer did not need them. One night, Yusuf asked, "Do you still hear him?" Etienne shook his head. "No. Perhaps you listen for the wrong sound." Etienne glanced at him through the bars. "And what does yours sound like?" Yusuf smiled faintly. "Like breathing." The answer lingered in the air, strange and gentle. Etienne wanted to ask more, but stopped. He understood in part, the same way he understood the quiet between one heartbeat and the next. The next morning, Etienne awoke before dawn. He walked to the courtyard where the prisoners were allowed air under guard. The light was pale, the air damp. From the eastern horizon came the first call to prayer. He turned toward it instinctively, as did Yusuf. One facing east, the other west, both bowing in the same moment. When they rose, Etienne met Yusuf's eyes. "We both pray for forgiveness," he said. Yusuf nodded. Forgiveness is the only victory left. Etienne's throat tightened. After Acre, after all that I saw, I am not sure heaven forgives so easily. Yusuf replied, Heaven never speaks of ease, only truth. The knight looked down at his hands, scarred, unclean, trembling. And the truth? That we are both his creation, Yusuf said softly, and he is waiting to see if we will remember it. That evening, the sunset burned red across the city, bleeding light over both mosques and churches. The two men watched through the same narrow window. Neither spoke. Etienne wondered what prayers rose into that sky, and whether God, watching, could still tell whose were whose. As darkness came, he felt the weight of every order, every sermon, every vow of obedience that had made him forget mercy. He said quietly, I once believed faith meant never doubting. Now I think it means doubting, but walking anyway. Yusuf turned toward him, eyes reflecting the torchlight. Then you are closer to God than I have ever been. Etienne almost smiled, but it broke into a sigh. And yet, I have never felt farther. Outside, the wind rose from the desert, sweeping over the walls, carrying dust from old battlefields. It entered the cell like breath, passing between them. The flame wavered, but did not die. Neither man spoke again that night. They sat across from one another, two believers stripped of certainty, two souls waiting for a sign that might never come. But in that wordless waiting, heaven was not absent. It was listening. The orders came without warning. Riders from the garrison brought sealed letters from Acre, a new command written in the name of the crown and the cross. Etienne broke the wax and read in silence. The words were simple, merciless. The Saracen captives in the citadel were to be transferred north for exchange. The weak, the sick, and the unrecorded were to be disposed of quietly before the march. No names, no witnesses, no prayers. He stood there for a long moment, the parchment trembling in his hand. He had obeyed 1,000 orders before, but this one felt different. It was not war. It was cruelty disguised as obedience, and he had no stomach left for obedience. When he entered Yusuf's cell, the man was sitting in the same corner, writing verses with a piece of charcoal on the wall. The letters were half in Arabic, half in shapes Etienne could not read. Yusuf looked up. You have news. Etienne nodded. You are to be moved. Where? He hesitated. North. But you will not get there. Yusuf studied him quietly. I see. Etienne's voice cracked. I am sorry. Don't be. You didn't write the order. Perhaps not, Etienne said. But I have written others. The silence between them felt heavier than the chains. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and still. Etienne walked to the bars and lowered his voice. If I let you go, will you return to your sword? Yusuf shook his head. The sword returned me to God. That is enough. Then listen, Etienne said. Tonight, when the guards change, the gate to the lower courtyard will be open. There will be a horse tied by the well. Take it. Ride east. Yusuf frowned. You risk your life for me. For you? Etienne asked, almost laughing. No, for the prayer you taught me. Yusuf rose slowly. If you do this, they will call you traitor. They already do, Etienne said. The night was black, the moon hidden behind storm clouds. Etienne came in silence, cloak drawn, keys in hand. The corridor smelled of oil and rain-soaked stone. He unlocked the cell. The hinges groaned softly, like old bones. Yusuf stepped forwards, chains dragging. Etienne knelt, broke the manacles with the butt of his dagger, and tossed the broken iron aside. For a moment, Neither spoke. The torchlight flickered between them, casting two shadows that stretched together across the wall. "You could kill me now," Yusuf said. Etienne smiled faintly. "Then we would both lose." They stepped into the courtyard. The rain began again, light and steady. The city around them slept under truce and exhaustion. Etienne led him to the gate. Beyond it lay the dark hills that led east toward the desert, toward freedom. Yusuf paused. "What will you tell them?" "The truth," Etienne said. "That I freed a man who no longer hated me." Yusuf's eyes softened. "Then we both have done something impossible." He reached out, placed his hand briefly over Etienne's heart. "May your God forgive you." "And yours," Etienne whispered. "Remember you." Yusuf turned, mounted the waiting horse, and rode into the rain. The gate closed behind him with a sound like finality. Etienne stood alone in the courtyard, his hair plastered to his face, his armor heavy with water. He sank to his knees. "Lord," he said, voice breaking, "I have failed my order, but not you." Thunder rolled across the sky, echoing through the empty streets. In the distance, far beyond the city walls, a single flash of lightning lit the road east. Etienne bowed his head. "Go in peace," he whispered, though the words were swallowed by the storm. When dawn came, the cell was empty. The chains lay broken on the floor. Etienne remained at his post until the guards found him and took his sword. He did not resist. Some victories, he knew, are not meant to be kept. Morning light entered the citadel like judgment. It crawled across the floors, touching the chains, the broken lock, the open gate. The captain of the guard stood in silence, staring at the empty cell. Etienne knelt before him, unarmed, his head bowed. There was no struggle, no denial. His hands rested calmly on his knees, as if already praying for the punishment that would come. The captain's voice was cold. "You freed an enemy of Christ." Etienne looked up. "I freed a man. That man will kill again. Then let his conscience be his sword," Etienne said. The captain's fist struck him hard across the face. Blood bloomed across his lip, but he did not move. He had bled before for glory. This time he bled for truth. By noon, the judgment was given. Etienne was stripped of his cloak, his spurs, and his vows. The red cross was torn from his chest. He was cast out from the order, forbidden to wear its seal, to pray in its chapels, or to bear arms in the name of God. The brothers stood in two lines as he passed between them, their faces hidden. None spoke. The silence was crueler than condemnation. He stepped into the courtyard, the light blinding after the shadows of the cell. A small crowd watched. Soldiers, servants, merchants who smelled scandal in the air. Etienne removed his gauntlets and dropped them at the gate. "Mercy," he said softly, "was always the harder vow." They sent him north with no coin, no horse, no title. His armor was left behind, a relic of a man he no longer was. He walked barefoot beyond the city walls, through the olive groves where the ground was soft and red from rain. The bells of Jerusalem rang behind him, echoing off stone and sky. For the first time, they did not sound like victory or warning. They sounded like absolution. He reached a hill overlooking the city. From there he could see both the Dome of the Rock and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre glowing in the same sun. The light touched both equally, gold upon gold. Etienne smiled through swollen lips. "You never chose sides," he whispered. He sat beneath an olive tree and closed his eyes. He saw again Yusuf's face, the calm, the gratitude, the peace that had eluded him all his life. He wondered if the man had reached safety. He wondered if mercy, once begun, could survive distance. A shepherd passed and offered him water. Etienne thanked him and drank. The water tasted of stone and dust, of the same earth that had buried too many men in God's name. He stayed there until the sun lowered and the air cooled. That night he found a small chapel outside the city, half-ruined, roofless, abandoned since the wars. He entered and knelt on the cold floor. The altar was cracked, but a candle still burned in the corner, left by some forgotten pilgrim. Its flame bent toward him, unsteady but alive. He whispered his confession not to priest or relic, but to the silence itself. "I fought for heaven," he said, "and forgot what it looked like. I obeyed every command but the one you wrote in mercy. If this is exile, let it be my penance." The wind passed through the chapel, carrying the scent of rain. Etienne felt peace, fragile, uncertain, but real. He no longer needed to be forgiven. He only needed to forgive himself. At dawn, he took one last look toward Jerusalem. The city shimmered under the morning light. The call to prayer rose from the east, followed by the distant echo of church bells. The two sounds drifted together across the valley. Etienne listened, eyes closed. The languages were different, but the message was the same. He smiled. "Heaven never chose a tongue," he said. And for the first time in years, he walked without fear. Years passed. The war ended, then began again, as all wars do when men mistake memory for faith. The truce between Richard and Saladin faded into dust, but the story of the knight and the prisoner did not. It lingered, whispered in taverns and monasteries, a parable too human to die. In the citadel of Jerusalem, repairs were made. The cell where Yusuf had once knelt became storage for armor and grain. The wall he had written on was painted over with lime. The guards changed. The emblems on their tunics changed. Even the rulers of the city changed. Yet something waited beneath the plaster. One day, a novice monk, cleaning the lower halls, noticed the wall flaking. He scraped at the paint and found letters beneath. 2 sets, faint and intertwined. One was in Latin, the other in Arabic. The words mirrored each other perfectly. In Latin, Miserere nobis, Domine. Have mercy upon us, Lord. In Arabic, Igfir lana, Ya Allah. Forgive us, O God. The monk called for his abbot. The old man came squinting in the dim light, tracing the lines with trembling fingers. 2 prayers, he murmured, but one voice. The abbey scholars debated whether it was a miracle or a message. Some said the inscriptions had bled through from a vanished mural. Others swore the wall itself remembered the prayers of the men who had stood there. Whatever the truth, the abbot ordered that no more paint should cover it. He named it the Dual Creed of Jerusalem. Word spread quickly among pilgrims. People came from both sides of the city, Christians, Muslims, even Jews, to see the wall where 2 enemies had prayed the same words in 2 tongues. The air there was cool, almost alive. When the wind passed through the chamber, it sounded like whispering, as though the wall still recited its prayer to anyone willing to listen. Years later, a scribe from Acre copied the inscription onto parchment. One side he wrote in Latin, the other in Arabic. He sealed it in wax and sent it to Rome, where it was placed among the curiosities of the Crusades. A relic, a reminder, a mystery. But to the people of Jerusalem it was not a relic. It was proof that faith, once spoken without fear, could echo beyond its owner. Centuries rolled over the city. Empires rose and fell, each swearing it would keep Jerusalem forever, and each discovering that forever is shorter than prayer. The citadel became a fortress, then a ruin, then a museum. The wall still stood, scarred and half-hidden. Tourists touched it without knowing its story. Then one afternoon, an old imam visited with a group of students. He pressed his palm to the stone, feeling the groove of the letters beneath the dust. A Christian priest stood nearby, watching quietly. The imam turned to him and said, "These words are yours?" The priest smiled. "They are ours." The 2 men bowed their heads, not in argument, but in reverence. For a moment, the chamber seemed to breathe. The wind from the doorway stirred, lifting a thin veil of dust into the air. It shimmered in the sunlight like incense. The priest whispered, "He prayed to Allah." The imam replied, "And he prayed to God." They both said together, "And God listened." When they left, the wall was quiet again, but the echo of their voices remained. Another verse added to a conversation centuries long. At night, when the city fell asleep and the muezzin's last call faded into silence, the citadel stood watch over the same streets that had once divided and united faith. The moonlight slipped through the window, touching the wall where two prayers met. The letters glowed faintly, as if remembering every hand, every breath, every act of mercy ever spoken in that place. It was not a miracle carved by saints. It was only the memory of two men who had dared to forgive. And in a city built of prayers, that memory was the holiest relic of all. Time softened the wars, but not the yearning. Centuries later, pilgrims still walked the streets where the cross and the crescent once clashed, each hoping to find a trace of holiness left unspoiled by blood. They came to the citadel, to the chamber where the two inscriptions remained, one Latin, one Arabic, etched into the same wall like a heartbeat that never stopped. No one knew the names anymore. The records of the Templars were burned. The scholars of Damascus lost their scrolls. Etienne de Vallon and Yusuf ibn Khalid vanished into the fog of unrecorded grace, yet their silence endured. The wall had become the truest scripture of Jerusalem, not written by kings, not argued by clerics, but born of exhaustion and mercy. It was a place without sermons, only echoes. Visitors who entered often fell quiet, as if words would disturb something older than faith. A chronicler from Tyre once described it. "There is no light there, and yet one sees clearly. It is as if the two prayers continue, invisible, sustaining the city when the city forgets itself." In time, the dual creed was copied across the world. Monks carried it to Rome. Scholars copied it in Cairo. Sailors brought it west to Spain, where it was read in monasteries built on Moorish stone. Everywhere it went, people added their own translations, Syriac, Greek, Hebrew, each finding their own tongue in the shared mercy. The words changed shape but not meaning. In every language, it still said the same thing: "Have mercy upon us." The wars that followed could not erase it. The Crusades ended, but the hunger to divide did not. New empires came, new gods of politics and power, yet the old wall kept whispering beneath them. Even now, when the muezzin's call rises from the dome of the rock and the bells of the Holy Sepulchre answer a moment later, the two sounds cross above the city, indistinguishable to anyone listening with their eyes closed. It is the same harmony that once lived in a prison cell, the sound of two prayers meeting halfway. Faith, it seems, never needed translation. What separates men is not belief, but fear. Once fear falls silent, the voice that remains belongs to both. The legend says that before his death, Etienne wandered the hills beyond the Jordan, living as a hermit. He kept no relics but a small scrap of parchment, written in two scripts. He prayed it each dawn and dusk until the words blurred into one. When he died, his lips were still moving, the two prayers merging on his tongue. Yusuf's end was never recorded. Some said he returned to Damascus. Others claimed he became a teacher again, writing verses about mercy and the futility of conquest. But a single poem survived in a later manuscript, unsigned. "Between my chains and his sword I found God waiting, not in victory, but in forgiveness." No one knows who wrote it. No one needs to. Jerusalem remembers them both, not as conqueror or captive, but as men who discovered that God listens in every language. The cross and the crescent still stand above the same horizon, both gilded by the same sun. The city breathes their echo, and when the wind rises through its narrow streets at night, it carries the sound of two prayers once spoken in the dark, a harmony older than hatred. Faith spoke the same language when fear was gone. Jerusalem endures. Its stones bear the weight of prophets and kings, of prayers spoken in every tongue the wind has ever known. The cross still glints on its towers, the crescent still shines from its domes, and the air between them trembles with the same question that began in a prison cell long ago. Do we speak to God or through him? Each night the city breathes both prayers. The bells toll and the muezzin calls, and their echoes weave above the roofs like two threads of one eternal song. They no longer argue. They coexist. The sky receives them both, patient as mercy. Somewhere within those walls the chamber still stands. The stone is worn smooth by centuries of hands, pilgrims pressing fingers to the faint grooves where Latin and Arabic once met. They touch it not for proof, but for remembrance, to feel what forgiveness once felt like. The air there is cool, weightless. If you listen closely, you can almost hear two voices whispering in rhythm, one saying, Domine, the other, Allahumma, both meaning Lord. They spoke at once, and heaven listened. The story of the knight and the prisoner has passed beyond legend now. It lives wherever enemies share silence, wherever strangers pray side by side, wherever mercy defies fear. It reminds us that holiness does not belong to those who conquer, but to those who forgive. If faith once spoke in two tongues, perhaps mercy still remembers the sound. If two prayers could rise from a single cell, perhaps the world can rise with them. If heaven ever listens again, it will not listen for the name we use, but for the mercy we show. Faith is not born in battlefields or written on banners. It survives in gestures small enough to be missed. A cup of water, an open gate, a shared prayer in the dark. That is the language that cannot be lost. The wars will fade, the empires will crumble, and the stones will keep their silence. But mercy will keep speaking. So let it speak through us. Let it cross the walls we build. Let it remember the sound of peace. Because one night, in a cell in Jerusalem, two men prayed in different tongues, and God heard only one voice. If faith once spoke in two tongues, let it speak again.